Hello, this is Real History with Melissa, and I have got Nick Hayes back with me today. And we are recording this on the 20th of November, and it's going to go up next week. That could be Thursday, it could be Friday. As Nick said, we're going to keep you guessing. So we are excited to be talking about chapters 6 through 10. We thought it went well last time to talk about five chapters that seemed to take up our block of time. And so we're going to give it another five chapters today. There were just a couple of random things that I wanted to say before we dive into the book. And that is, it's mainly about you going over to Hayes Reviews and seeing his channel. I'll send you to YouTube. I'll put a link up. He's got a channel on Rumble. I think he's over on Odyssey too. I know he is. I've checked that one out before. And he's got a lot of ways to support him, but he's also got book club. And he's doing something different with book club. And I want to mention it because he's just launched into political ponerology, which is another great book that Alan Watt has mentioned a few times over the years. And this is well, I can let Nick explain a little bit more about that book for you, but they just started this week on the introduction and part of chapter one. So by the time you see this, they'll probably be into chapter two or in that neighborhood. It's really worth studying this book, and I'll try to make it over there as often as I can. Now, he's doing a new thing with that. It was on Wednesdays, and they're going to expand it. So he'll cover some material, make an introduction about it, read, do a live reading, and then they'll wrap around the following Tuesday. They will have a discussion about the material that was read previous. So that'll be an interesting way. And I think it's good. I think that'll be helpful because it helps you absorb the material. And he just finished the Club of Rome book. I'll let him briefly recap that for you too, it's another must read. And then on his Friday live stream, he has been covering Zygmunt Brzezinski's Between Two Ages, and I have made it to almost all of those. I've missed a couple, but I've been there for the rest, and it's beneficial to do a book club kind of read along with someone, even if you've already read the material, which is why I am going to be sure when he finishes Between Two Ages to be participating with him on the, the great coverage, which I can't wait for, which is Foundations, Their Power and Influence. And as you know, that came up in the first conversation because I just read it a couple of years ago. And what C.S. Lewis is talking about here in that hideous strength is more than, well, it's an evil think tank, a research center slash think tank. And it shows you the inner workings of the kind of things that we know from reading Foundations, Their Power and Influence came into being really in the 1930s. And even though that book focuses on the US and US academia and US politics, this is global. It's a global agenda. So I want you to go over to Hayes Reviews and support him if you like, because he's doing really important work, I think, to take books that Alan Watt and others, it's not just only books that Alan Watt mentioned, but to take these books and give them a close examination, because as you know, Alan would just mention it and then move on. And this gives us an opportunity to actually study the material, and that's a good thing. So fill in the little gaps real quickly of what I just missed. And
Thank you so much. That was a really great summary. Really, there's not a lot to fill in, but yeah, we've been working diligently in the book club, meeting every week. We've covered three books now. Surveillance Valley by Yasha Levine, which is an essential reading on the history of the internet and how it was really cooked up as counterinsurgency technology. Its purpose has been to spy and gather intel on populations since the start, and so we covered that book. We did four arguments for the elimination of television, which is just all about what happens when you get information via the screen versus, for example, reading a book or talking to somebody else or um, having direct experience of reality. This kind of condensing it down to this screen format. It's a really amazing book, especially in the modern day where we're all addicted to smartphones and devices of various kinds. And so those two books are in the archive inside book club, the replays. And then we did the first global revolution. And that was a really exciting read. It's a piece of propaganda, first and foremost. So they say in the beginning of the book that this is aimed at young people and they want to get young people on board because they're the people who need to fight. And they use this language of war. You know, it's a war on terror, it's a war on drugs, it's a war on carbon that we're heading into. And so they openly say that at the beginning. And they have a quote at the very start of the book, which is the same quote that's on the Fabian Socialist window, which blew my mind when I realized that they used exactly the same quote, albeit an expanded version, which says basically, smash the world to bits and remold it nearer to the heart's desire. Whereas on the window, it just says remold it nearer the heart's desire. But the full quote is smash it to bits and then remold it. So it's an amazing piece of propaganda. It's all in there. The narrative, the message, the approved, authorized. This is what you have to believe and think. And I had a great time reading it. It made me quite ranty in places. I went off on tangents and was kind of banging my fist on my desk and just getting all righteous. So it was a lot of fun. But yeah, now we're doing political ponerology. We just started it. The format has changed slightly because I'm trying to get more um, interaction going. So previously, the recordings have mainly been me like I do on a Friday night live stream, but for a private audience of people in the community. So they're not publicly available. But now I'm trying to say, okay, it's all well and good me reading the book and giving you my thoughts, but I want to let's have a conversation about it. What do you think? What's your experience? What's your reflection? What came up for you? Because I'm only one person. These books are dense. There's a lot of information. I miss things. I forget things. But having a group there to do it, to discuss it, it helps everybody learn. You kind of you get this synergy of learning. It multiplies the learning that you can do, I think, when you're communicating with other people about it. So that's the plan now, is to read. I'll do a reading on a Wednesday as I normally do. That'll go in, the recording will go up. People will have a week to either catch up on the recording, read it themselves, make some notes. And then on the Tuesday night, we get together and we talk about it. And political ponerology is quite an academic book. There's terms in there that are unfamiliar because it's not only the word ponerology, but he makes all of these other words out of that word. So it's quite interesting. But the book itself has an amazing backstory. It's been one of these that was suppressed and ignored. It was an inconvenient book for the regime, the communist regime, because it was written in communist Poland, so it had to be smuggled and out of the country. And then it was apparently, it says on the back, suppressed by Zbigniew Brzezinski himself. He suppressed it. So it's quite amazing when we read these books in parallel to see the links between them. And as you mentioned, we got Foundations coming up on the main channel. That links in to what we're discussing today, C.S. Lewis, that hideous strength. So there really is some synchronicity and some value to having multiple books on the go. And so I think it's a valuable, worthwhile study. It's way more interesting than whatever outrageous thing is going on in the news cycle, which is just a puppet show to keep people distracted and fearful. This is the kind of study and learning that I think is empowering. It can get you more in touch with reality than all that other stuff, all that clickbait, fear porn type of outrage content is really just there to manipulate your emotions. But when you're reading a book that you've chosen to read and you are going through it slowly at your own pace, you're stopping, you're starting, you're going back, rereading things, you're more in control. You're still going to be manipulated because a lot of books have things missing or omissions or propaganda levels to them. But you have much more control over the experience and it is more beneficial for you. You can, like I said, learn new words, your concentration expands, your powers of communication, of articulation also improve in a way that just passively watching some documentary or some debate or whatever it might be, podcast interview, etc. It's passive. This is an active thing. And that's what I'm really passionate about with my channels and with the book club is get active, get a little more switched on you don't have to be qualified. You don't have to be, I'm not qualified, but I like books as objects. And I was very worried about censorship. So I thought, okay, let's buy these books up. And then I thought, well, let's talk to people about them. So you don't have to be academic. You don't need a certificate in a frame above your toilet or wherever people put their certificates. I don't know. But
That's where it
like,
belongs, or in
so
it.
that, yeah, so just anybody can get involved. And that's what I really like is when people start to come out of their shell a little bit. And there's no pressure in the community. If you want, you can just come in and listen. You don't have to talk. You don't have to switch your camera on. You can just wallflower for the discussions. But I think over time, you'll warm up and you realize that this is a curated group of people, and most people who are interested in books and learning from them tend to be thoughtful, tend to be kind, patient, tend to be good people because they realize the manipulation that goes on in that other realm of media. And there's much less of that over here in the book world. So, yeah, I appreciate your endorsement. And I'm looking forward to what we've got coming up because there's so many good books. And sometimes I just look around in my
I
collection. I'm
know.
thinking, I can't wait to get around to all these books. So, we've got a lot to get through. And it's beneficial for as many people to learn from these and get involved. Yeah.
And there is one thing that you made me remember there, and that is the idea of synchronicity and how that is created in a situation of people who are coming together for something, a common interest that they share. And in this case, it's studying the books with us. And I see these experiences all the time over on Telegram with the CTTM book club. And Nick and I have exchanged a couple that happened around this. And the first was that I had chosen a Redux to go up last week, and I picked it because of COP. COP 30 was going on. I realized that when I was chatting with Neil Foster, that it was time for COP, which is Conference of the Parties, the UN thing, and they all get together. The supra government, the parallel government, the Sherpas, the bureaucrats, and decide how we're going to live and what kind of carbon taxes we're going to pay. And so I was looking for something and I picked it, and it happened to be part 4 of Real News is Sparse. And I had just done part 1 of Real News is Sparse maybe 5 weeks ago. So I thought, oh, well, that's interesting. I hope people don't get confused by the title because I'm not going to be bothered to retitle it today. But anyway, I put that up. But as I was listening to it and illustrating it, I was kind of blown away because there is Alan talking with great distaste about the Soviet experimentation on animals. The fact that, as we learned in the first, section of the book, they did vivisection. C.S. Lewis was against vivisection. He fell out with a lot of his colleagues over this. That were scientists that said, "Oh, we have to do this. We have to experiment in this way." Well, Alan was covering in that talk from 2000. Well, I don't want to remember. Just go on the website and pull it up. Real News is Sparse, part 4. And he is talking about, I mean, just think about this is so horrible. It's so gruesome. But this is what scientism does. They cut the head off a dog, see if it'll stay alive with tubes and so forth on its own. And then they take that head and move it over to the body of a completely different breed of dog and sew it on there to see if that works. These things happened. Horrible. And then Nick was saying recently that he's been starting with the 20 latest talks of Alan Watts, so into 2021. And he said, I got to February 7, and there is Alan, who doesn't talk about C.S. Lewis and didn't talk about that hideous strength. And there he was, reading an article talking about the UN, which was that hideous strength revisit it or a closer look at that hideous drink, something
Hmm.
like that. So, but the point that I'm making is that synchronicity within small groups, 2 or 3 people or 20 people that are in your book club, it's a very real thing. And I find it quite invigorating. It's like you're doing the right thing. You know you're
Yeah,
involved in, yeah.
it's
So
exactly that's it. It's a little sign that to me as well, I have that intuition that it's a sign that you're going in the right way. And I'll give another example. This is a personal one, but when I was buying books and scouring bookshops and looking for things and trying to find those neglected but cheap books that have been cleaned out of university libraries, I would quite often grab a book and think, oh, that title looks interesting, and I'd flick through it and I'd see my birth year and it would just be there on a page and I would think, okay, maybe that's a sign that I got to get this one, and it just happened quite often. So, and I didn't, it just happened so often that I thought this is just a little sign that you should grab hold of this one at it. You don't know when you're going to need it, when you're going to refer to it, but it was just one of those little wink. I call it like a wink from the universe or a little nod or a little encouragement that you're going in the right direction. Keep going. And yes, the ones that happen between people and in groups as well, they're even more special.
I like that. My mom had a book on the bookshelf. I think I gave it away to charity because I have, from time to time had to actually clean out things. But she had a book called God Winks, which was all about
Nice.
little serendipities and synchronicities. So, but I'm glad I passed it on. Somebody else can benefit from that. All right. Are you ready to crack in to chapter
Yes.
6? All right. Do you want to lead off and tell us
Yeah.
what's
So chapter 6, we get a really good insight into Mark. So I was thinking about the name Mark. We talked quite a bit about names in part one of our discussion of that hideous strength, and I realized that the name Mark is has the connotation of a mark for someone who's a target, right? When you
good.
talk about the mark between thieves or criminals of some kind, that just occurred to me today, and what we kind of get over these 5 chapters really is as Mark gets deeper into the nice, the foundation, the what is it, the National Institute of Coordinated Experiments. He gets deeper. He gets into the inner circles, and then he gets to the very center, and it's very synchronous with what Alan was talking about in the talk that you mentioned with the vivisection. But we'll get to that a little later because first, in this chapter, we get an insight into what Mark's role is to be. And we talked about how he was recruited for his writing skills. He thought it was his sociology skills, but it wasn't. It was because he could pen in his essays and his articles in a way that was scientific. He didn't refer to things. He had that scientism uh, way of skirting around reality. So it told us that he didn't use words like man and woman, but he would refer to populations and groups and had all this sort of academic terminology, which is often used to bedazzle and bewilder and confuse and obfuscate the true intentions and the true ideas about things. So what happens in chapter 6 is um, Marx brought in to the a very a much inner circle. So this he gets invited to come and join and have a drink in the library with Lord Feverstone, who I'll just remind people is divine from the first book. And he goes to the library, and then he realizes it's a small meeting of Feverstone, Mark, Philostrato, the fairy, and Strike, who is the priest who's aligned himself with the nice, and the deputy director as well, and Professor Frost, who is based on you were saying in the last video, based on Freud. Got
Mhm.
his pince nez and his little beard, and he's also he's not that big a character yet, is he? But he's there. He's watching in, and they start to go to these meetings in the library, and they're plying him with alcohol and they're making him feel sort of special and included. And then it's revealed to him that uh, they're planning a riot down in Edgestowe. And this is the first instance where he gets a kind of real inkling, or at least that he sort of sees that this is a criminal organization, or it's willing to commit crime. And this is quite an interesting section because something happens that is repeated, and that is to do with Mark's decision making. But just to go to that bit, it says they're talking about how the riot was timed for next week, but the they'd planned a riot in Edgestowe to happen because they want to take it over. They want the nice police to become the only police force to supplant the actual national police there. And then Mark cottons on. He realizes that they're planning this riot, and he says, "You mean you've engineered the disturbances?" The narrator says, to do him justice, his mind was reeling from this new revelation. Nor was he aware of any decision to conceal his state of mind. In the snugness and intimacy of that circle, he found his facial muscles and his voice, without any conscious volition, taking on the tone of his colleagues. So this is a theme that keeps coming through. Mark is like really impressionable. He wants to impress the people around him. He'll kind of copy them, their manners, and and he has this deep desire to be liked. And that's kind of a weakness of his. He's not sort of self-confident. He doesn't know how to stand in his own principles and values. He's looking to the sources of authority and the people higher than him in the food chain. So he says, "You mean you've engineered the disturbances?" And then Miss Hardcastle, the fairy, says, "Quite. It's always done. Anyone who knows police work will tell you. And as I say, the real thing, the big riot, must take place within the next 48 hours." So there's this admission that these kind of disturbances are always manufactured by the police, problem, reaction, solution. And then she says the reason is that you don't get powers to act effectively until there's a disturbance, which reminded me a lot of Big C event, emergency powers. It reminded me a lot of September the 11th, of course, the same thing as well.
Hmm.
These
Hmm.
emergency temporary powers that get assumed to deal with this crisis and that never get rolled back. They just remain on the books forever, and they just
Hmm.
become ready to use in a moment's notice. Feverston says, emergency regulations. You'll never get the powers we want at Edgestowe until the government declares that a state of emergency exists there. So this is giving you an insight into this organization and the planning that they are capable of. And then it turns out that Mark's job is to manage the publicity because he's a writer and they get him writing articles. And they say to him, the stories must all be ready to appear in the papers the very day after the riot. That means it must be handed to the DD, the director, by 6 tomorrow morning at latest. Mark, but how are we to write it tonight if the thing doesn't happen till tomorrow? Everyone burst out laughing. It is naivety. You'll never manage publicity that way, Mark, said Feverston. You surely don't need to wait for a thing to happen before you tell the story of it. And so this chapter is largely he then goes off with the fairy to work on these two articles, and then we get the full articles in the chapter. And this is just another excellent testament to C.S. Lewis, his writing abilities, because he does these two articles, and one is aimed at the educated class, the people who read the higher level newspapers, who they've said previously are the easiest ones to fool and indoctrinate, right? Because they're educated, they're so self-confident, they know where the good information comes from. They're the easiest ones. They're the most indoctrinated because they've been through the system, so much of the system and the schooling. But it's the working class that are a little harder to get on board because they're more skeptical and suspicious. So he writes these two articles, and one of them's aimed at the sort of educated class, and the other one's aimed at the working class. And yeah, what did you think about these articles? I enjoyed reading them quite a lot and seeing the different rhetorical sort of sophistry that was used in both of them.
I enjoyed them too. I wonder if you want to share. They're lengthy articles because this was back in the day in which that's another thing that's changed about modern society. And I remember Alan, I don't want to misattribute, but I think he read something on air once during the Obama administration that might have come from the Cass Sunstein nudge guy, who was basically saying that the normal adult didn't have an attention span to give an article more than 6 minutes. And that
Wow.
was the educated class. So, but if you want to give us just a flavor of both of them, that might be fun.
Yeah. First one. The first one is the longest of the two. And it kind of frames the NICE as this benevolent organization, and it speaks on behalf of the people, saying that the the people who it kind of frames the people who are suspicious of the NICE as being oh well, this bit here it says it's disquieting to be forced to suspect that the old distrust of planned efficiency and the old jealousy of what is ambiguously called a bureaucracy can be so easily, though we hope temporarily, revived. Though at the same time, this very suspicion, by revealing the gaps and weaknesses in our national level of education, emphasizes one of the very diseases which the National Institute exists to cure. That it will cure it, we have no doubt. The will of the nation is behind this magnificent peace effort, as Mr. Jules so happily described the Institute, and any ill informed opposition which ventures to try conclusions with it will be, we hope, gently, but certainly firmly resisted. So it's framing this organization as something that is just very, very good, a very wonderful thing. And the people who are suspicious of it are ill informed and jealous and suspicious, right?
Yeah, there's another thing too I'll mention about this first one. This struck me because this is aimed at the educated class, but if we are honest with ourselves, we've been dumbed down across the board in the ensuing years since C.S. Lewis wrote this in 1945. And I that thought really hit me hard when I was listening to Aldous Huxley's Berkeley speech and his interview that he did with Mike Wallace. Just the because remember that okay, Berkeley's speech is going to students, etc., but Mike Wallace is going out across to the general public. And the language skills, the level of communicate, the articulateness of him, this is something that a modern art audience would have a difficult time not only concentrating on, but understanding some of the things that would be said. And he uses in here, this is again an article that's going to go to the educated class, but he says, he's talking about the problem and everything. He says that this problem has been solved by other countries in a manner which proved fatal to liberty and justice by creating a real imperium in imperio is a fact which no one is likely to forget. The so-called police of the nice, who should rather be called its sanitary executive, as the characteristically English solution. But the fact that he's using Latin in there, and there's an expectation that one will have studied Latin at university. I didn't. Now, my brother did. So if I don't have the internet handy, I might just ask him sometimes, what does this mean? And he will tell me. But this was a given for the educated classes, which is now not. That's interesting.
That's a great point. And later on as well, he talks about how he's framing the role of the knight as a rescuer, not saying that the rescuer who can remove the criminal from the harsh sphere of punishment into that of remedial treatment. So this is a theme that comes through as well that they mentioned earlier, which is we got to get rid of this word punishment. We need people to think bad things when they hear it because we need to basically get our hands on these criminals and experiment on them until they're
Mhm.
cured, quote unquote, which just reminds me of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I might have said it last time, but he's cured at the end of that, isn't he?
Hmm.
So that they slipped that in there.
You know, other people who get cured, Brazil. Did you see the movie Brazil?
No, I haven't seen that one. Terry Gilliam, though,
Oh
isn't it?
yeah, he's cured at the end. Even in 1984, he's cured at the end. They because that's what this system does. It cures you good and proper.
Exactly. And actually, there's a conversation in a chapter, two or three chapters later with Philostrato when he's talking about what he and the nice want to
Yeah.
cure, right? So
Yeah.
a little foreshadowing there.
Yeah.
Um, and then to move on to the sort of second article, which is aimed at John Citizen. What is happening at Edgetoe? That is the question which John Citizen wants to have answered. So you can imagine this one being in your what do you call it? Your broad. So you would call the big papers, the newspapers for the sort of educated classes would be the broadsheets, and then you would have the sort of smaller ones, the Sun, the People. They'd have a page three model and the sports in the back. I forget what they were called. There's the broadsheets, and there was another word for them as well. But this would be in one of those. And what I noticed in this one is a lot of repetition of the word we. We are, we are not scientists and we do not pretend to know what the master brains of the institute are thinking, right? So
hmm
so they're so smart over there, those experts. We can't pretend to understand. We just have to sort of have faith and trust and believe, which is a religious terminology, right? Um,
We
we do not
ex
know.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
We do know what each man or woman expects of it. We expect a solution of the unemployment problem, the cancer problem, the housing problem, the problems of currency, of war, of education. We expect it a brighter, cleaner, and fuller life for our children. The nice is the people's instrument for bringing about all the things we fought for. Because this is, hot off the World War, right?
hmm
And this is just so brilliantly written
Mm.
um, because I can imagine this going right into one of these newspapers because they still do it today. Only
hmm
today it's more like these are the kind of scripts that you hear from the talking heads on the various channels on the internet. Um, but even in this
Di
article, it talks about cutting out red tape, which
yeah.
was said earlier, wasn't it? That they're on a war against red tape.
This is great. Skip over, just read that little bit. First of all, they're saying this was engineered. So this is great too, because the technique is, of course, it was engineered. But they want the common man to think that some sinister body engineered it to keep the common we from getting all of the good things that Nice wants to deliver. But read that little bit right after cutting out the red tape. I've one bit of advice. I love that's a choice paragraph.
Um, I've one bit of advice. If you hear anyone backbiting the nice police, tell him where he gets off. If you hear anyone comparing them to the Gestapo or the OGPU, tell him you've heard that one before. If you hear anyone talking about the liberties of England, by which he means the liberties of the obscurantists, the Mrs. Grundys, the bishops, and the capitalists, watch that man. He's the enemy. Tell him from me that the nice is the boxing glove on the democracy's fist, and if he doesn't like it, he'd best get out of the way. It is fantastic.
Yeah, it's really quite something.
And then so Mark spends the whole night drinking, getting drunk with the fairy, and writing these articles. And then the end of this section, it describes how he's feeling at the end of it, and it says, "All the while, the child inside him whispered how splendid and how triumphantly grown up it was to be sitting like this, so full of alcohol and yet not drunk, writing with his tongue in his cheek articles for great newspapers, against time with the printer's devil at the door and all the inner ring of the nice depending on him, and nobody ever again having the least right to consider him a nonentity or cipher." So the reason this stood out is because there's this theme running through of childishness. And I
hmm
think it applies to both Mark and Jane, who are quite childlike and childish, and I expect are going to grow up through the course of the book. And by the end, I don't know. I haven't read further than chapter 10 at this point, but it's mentioned quite a bit, these childish aspects on both sides of them. So I think that's something to sort of track as things go on. But yeah, he's pleased as punch with himself because he's got this important job and he's basically writing propaganda for these
hmm
important people, and his conscience. is left to one side. And the way it keeps happening, I think it might have mentioned it a little earlier, but it certainly comes up later. This phrase keeps coming up, which says, Mark couldn't quite remember when he made the decision, but it was
Hmm.
made. And this happens at least three times, and I think probably more throughout the book, where he just gets swept along with the rhetoric, with the energy of the people in the nice, the director and Fairy Hardcastle and Feverstone. He's really a pawn, and he's just being used. But he
Hmm.
kind of lies to himself, and he just allows it to happen without much resistance. Because the other thing that happens at the start of this chapter that we mentioned on the last video is his he gets this massive pay cut because he's been fussing too much about exactly what his job is. So they give him £600 a year instead of the original 1,500, I think it was,
Yeah.
because he's just bothering them. So there's he's quite childish in this way. He's sort of he's not sticking up for anything bigger or higher or high-minded, no values, nothing larger or more important than in himself, his ego, and what he wants, his career.
There was something else too that I've noticed about the beginning of this chapter in terms of bringing Mark into the fold, into the inner sanctum circle. And that is that Wither, who is the deputy director, is
Again, another
talking.
great name as well,
Yes,
Wither.
yeah, yeah. And Wither is talking to him about the idea that, there's no, this is not a place where get an appointment to, because remember, he's already been demoted a little bit in the eyes of everybody, and not just on his salary, but in terms of, oh, did we get the right guy here? Because he's being so fussy. And so Wither tells him, this is really more of you want to treat membership here. And that's another key thing there that we didn't mention in the first recording is that not only does he press for the salary, get the salary to drop down from 1,500 pounds to 600 pounds a year, but there was a membership buy-in
Mm,
there.
yes, there was.
And that, I didn't really think about it immediately, but as I got to this section, he's saying, so this is more of a vocation. He said, we are, as I have said before, more like a family, or even perhaps like a single personality. There must be no question of taking your orders, as you rather unfortunately suggest, from some specified official and considering yourself free to adopt an intransigent attitude towards your colleagues. So, and he says, you must make yourself useful, generally useful. So I wrote in the margin, Legion. This is Legion. And that
I
this,
put Hive at the
yes.
top there.
Yeah.
One
So,
single personality. That was the thing,
yeah,
isn't it?
one single personality. And the sense that I have of Mark, because he doesn't have what you described as knowing his own mind, standing on his own 2 feet, it's kind of like people-pleasing personality, is that I continue as we learn more and more about him to think that he has been targeted, he's been made the mark because he's one that they think they can possess. That word
Yeah.
really comes to mind here. So,
Yes. I think you're definitely on something there as well. Miss Hardcastle tells him, elasticity, Sonny, elasticity. You you never will. Your line is to do whatever you're told, and above all, not to bother the old man.
hmm hmm And even when he's having the childlike kind of delight in what he did, that section there that you read about um, his work on the newspaper articles, he says, he wants to think of it like a practical joke, again, very childlike.
Yeah.
But then he gets into something that is much darker and more sinister, which is rationalization and justification. Anyway, he says to himself, if he didn't do it, someone else would.
That's
And
it.
yeah, that is how one becomes possessed.
And because also, like earlier in this chapter, it talks about how he was working at the rehabilitation of Alcasan, and this person, Alcasan, is going to be important, and is actually mentioned in the very beginning of the book because it's the disgraced eminent scientist who poisons his wife and gets sent to the guillotine. And Jane has a dream about him. And that's the first dream she has that freaks her out and kind of sends her off on her adventure. And part of Mark's work is to rehabilitate this guy and make him, oh, he wasn't all that bad and he was misunderstood, and start peppering the newspapers with these articles, these opinion pieces, which are trying to make him out to be maybe the victim or something. And it's kind of curious. We didn't know why that was the case. We find out in this chapter a little bit later. But one of the things we talked about, I think it was on Saturday's call in the CTTM book club, was Winston has a similar kind of role, this rewriting of history, Winston in
Hmm.
1984,
Hmm.
and just how the Mark and Winston, they end up doing the similar kind of work. They're managing people's minds through propaganda and memory holding certain information, and changing the past. Um, because this guy Alcasan, he poisoned his wife. That's what we're told at the beginning, and that's why he was sentenced to death. But they he's given that task, and Mark says his articles and letters about Alcasan appeared in papers where he would never have had the entree over his own signature, papers read by millions. He could not help feeling a little thrill of pleasurable excitement.
Hmm.
So yeah, he's got this power, and he's starting to let it get to him,
Hmm.
and he's being brought into this inner circle in the library. He's really chuffed because Steele, I think, is not there. Is it Steele? What? There's some other guy who's not there, and he's really like glad to see this person's not there because it
I
was
think it's
got a
Steele who's the regular at the library that annoys him. Which, by the way, I think in the first recording, I may have referred to the Freud-like character as Steele, but it is Frost.
it is
And
Frost.
and as I was thinking about that this morning, I don't remember if I said it right or wrong, but at any rate, I had guessed that this was the Sigmund Freud character with the glasses, with the pointy beard. And then I thought, oh, of course, Frost, Freud Frost.
Freud Frost, yeah.
Yeah.
And so there's a little bit in this chapter about Jane, and Frost as well, again makes an appearance in her dreams, and she keeps dreaming that he's studying her. I think that's in this part as well. Oh no, no, sorry. She runs into Frost. That's what it is. She's going to
Mhm.
Edgestowe, and she sees Frost like get in a taxi or something, and it sends a total feeling of revulsion.
Uh-huh.
She says it says it was a total rejection or feeling of revulsion from this man on all levels of her being at once. Dreams sank into insignificance compared with the blinding reality of the man's presence. She shuddered to think that their hands might have touched as she passed him. And then she's on her way. I think she's going to St. Anne's to visit Mrs. Dimble and Camilla.
Hmm.
And then talking about this theme of sort of childlikeness, it tells us the childish levels, the undersoil of the mind had been turned up. She wanted to be with nice people, away from nasty people. That nursery distinction seeming at the moment more important than any later categories of good and bad or friend and enemy. Yeah, so her dreams are kind of freaking her out, I think, and then so she decides to go to visit the Dimbles over in St. Anne's, and she makes this journey, and that brings us pretty much to the end of the chapter, I think.
Yeah. We're at chapter 7, which is the Pendragon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. So Jane travels to St. Anne's and she goes to visit. It's a big manor house, and this is where the Dimbles are, and also the Denistons. They're both the two couples, aren't they? The Dimbles and the Denistons.
Hmm.
And I this sort of whole scene is it reminds me of, I don't know if you ever see the Harry Potter films, but there's a family, the Weasleys. Ron Weasley, the ginger guy, has this big family, lots of brothers and sisters, and Harry and Hermione go to his house, and it's just this really cozy house. It's just all teapots and open fires and slices of cake, and it's so quintessentially English and British that it gives me that wholesome feeling, because when they talk about a slice of cake in this book, it's not your cake that's been made with like GMO flour and has all additives and preservatives and high fructose corn syrup in the eye. It's like unadulterated cake made with good high quality organic ingredients and sandwiches. Whenever I hear these brandy, there's one point, or chocolate, where she gets some chocolate and brandy, and I always think of it as like almost like a platonic ideal of these things, because they just really don't exist, or they're very hard to find nowadays. But back then, they wouldn't have been so full of just horrible nasties.
Hmm.
But she goes to this house, and it's so wholesome. Everything and everyone that she meets at this house. Um, she meets Miss Ironwood again,
Hmm.
and I think she goes up there to tell them about this dream she's been having.
Yes,
Is that
and
right?
that yes, and one of we ended up chapter 5 with a little bit more about that dream. This dream is really important, and we don't need a lot of detail on it, but basically it's a dark place. She can't see anything in it, and that's important. She's feeling along the walls. It's like a damp, dark, underground place, So that's the
Oh
dream
yeah.
that she goes to tell them about.
Right. Because she made it, yeah, she agrees. She doesn't want to join them. She said to the Denistons, she doesn't
Hmm.
want to join them, but she said, I'll tell you whatever dreams I have.
Hmm.
So she's going up there to tell them about the dream. And then while she's there, she sees a photograph of Augustus Frost. Um, and then Miss Ironwood invites her to go and talk to the director, which is the Pendragon, which is Mr. Fisher King. He has many names. But what I just noticed as well reading these chapters is that this is basically the good team, the good guys, the
Hmm.
goodies, and
Hmm.
the nice is the bad guys and the
Hmm.
baddies. In case people haven't figured that out yet. But the nice have the deputy director, whereas these guys they have the director, right? He's
Yes,
he's like a
yeah,
level above the deputy director of
yeah,
the nice. So it's
yep,
just something I noticed this read through. I'm like, oh yeah, he's the director.
yeah. And
Um,
but before you send her in there, there's just one thing that I wanted to mention before you send her in to meet the
mhm.
director. Miss Ironwood, because we can see that in her childlike way, Jane is doing a lot of waffling. Well, I'll tell him about my dream, but I don't want to become involved. That kind of thing. So Miss Ironwood said, I have very little doubt that the director will see you. Jane said nothing. And at that interview, continued the other, you will, I presume, be called upon to make a final decision. So this is the thing, and Jane just makes a cough. And it
Yeah,
says here, see, he writes, she gave a little cough which had no other purpose than to dispel a certain air of unwelcome solemnity which seemed to have settled on the room as soon as she and Miss Ironwood were left alone, because really Miss Ironwood is kind of no nonsense. She's just saying, Mrs. Demble is this enclosure of prayerful maternal yumminess, just like you want to be around her. And Mrs. Deniston is also quite pleasant, but and there's nothing severe about Miss Ironwood, but she's no nonsense. And she's like just letting her know you're not sitting on the fence,
yeah, it's
and Jane
it's
can't
in or
take it.
out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she can't take it. It's like, oh.
And then there's a little bit insight into as she's going to the door, she's about to go into the room where the director is, and it says, Jane thought to herself, "Be careful. Don't get let in for anything. All these long passages and low voices will make a fool of you if you don't look out. You'll become another of this man's female adorers." Next moment she found herself going in. So this is a theme, yeah, that happens all the way through, is that she's always trying to retain her life, her what would you call it, her autonomy from her
Hmm.
husband, from society. It's like I should have my own life and I should be the master of my own life and certainly not submit to my husband, you know, certainly not
Hmm.
to submit to any other man. It really triggers her, this idea. So she's kind of in this, I don't know, what would you call it, kind of feminism or this
Oh
women's
yeah,
empowerful
yeah,
type.
yeah. I
Yeah.
think we're going to get to that in just a few pages,
Yeah.
and yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So she goes in to meet the director. Miss Ironwood tells her he's a man of very great experience who has traveled where no other human being ever traveled before and mixed in societies of which you and I have no conception. Of course, this is Ransom from the first two books. She goes into the room and it just says, Jane looked, and instantly her world was unmade.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Isn't that great?
It's a great line. It's such a good line.
Yeah.
Um, on the sofa before her, with one foot bandaged as if he had a wound, lay what appeared to be a boy, 20 years old. But all the light in the room seemed to run towards the gold hair and the gold beard of the wounded man. Of course, he was not a boy. The fresh skin on his forehead and cheeks, and above all on his hands, had suggested the idea. But no boy could have so full a beard, and no boy could be so strong. It was manifest that the grip of those hands would be inescapable, and imagination suggested that those arms and shoulders could support the whole house. The effect, she's talking about the effect of the room, was that of a throne room.
Mm.
There's another little bit as well I want to add. Oh, yeah, so on the next bit, next page, how could she have thought him young or old either? It
Hmm.
came over her with a sensation of quick fear that this face was of no age at all. Uh, she had that was because she had long since forgotten the imagined Arthur, that's King Arthur, I think, of her
Hmm.
childhood, and the imagined Solomon. Solomon, for the first time in many years, the bright solar blend of king and lover and magician which hangs about the name stole back upon her mind. For the first time in all those years, she tasted the word king itself, with all linked associations of battle, marriage, priesthood, mercy, and power. At that moment, her eyes first rested on his face. Jane forgot who she was and where, and where, and her faint grudge against Grace Ironwood, and her more obscure grudge against Mark, and her childhood and her father's house. Like, it's so funny. But the word I put in the side here was just noble, and
Hmm.
it links back to the first story, which depicts this kind of hierarchy, but it's a noble hierarchy of noble beings with God at the top, and then the archangels and the angels, the Eldila, you know, going down. Because we quite often think of hierarchy as something that becomes corrupted. Of course, in 2025 on Earth, on Thulkandra, where we live, pretty much every organization of any repute or renown or influence or power is corrupted all the way up to the very top. All the pyramid structures and systems was made abundantly clear during the Big C, and so it's very hard to fathom a hierarchy with noble, good people
Hmm.
uh, at every level going up. But that's what C.S. Lewis is depicting here, and I think that's something that is so, yeah, it's just alien. It's very hard to even imagine. You almost feel, I feel like cynicism comes, yeah, it's so ridiculous. It's so far fetched. But that's what he's trying to communicate. This man's noble. He's traveled. He's all these best qualities, you know, rolled into one. Um, and then he repeats again. Her world was unmade. She knew that anything might happen now.
Hmm.
So it's a great description there. Did I miss anything out?
I don't think so. No, I think that's perfect.
We got the best bits,
Absolutely.
didn't we? And it's quite, this whole interaction is very it's not what you'd expect, right? It's not Game of Thrones type thing. It's not some big dramatic I am the king and you know. It's a very almost, I want to say, like subtle and nuanced conversation. There's parts of it I
Hmm.
wasn't even sure I understood, that I wanted to get your opinion on because yeah, it was a very, it's like he doesn't need to do any commanding. He doesn't need to do any he doesn't need to impress, like he's just the power and the reality of his being and his presence is enough almost. Um, that things are just done, like the decision's made. It's already, I don't know, it's hard to put into words. What did you
Well,
make of this whole
there's something that I saw in him. It reminded me of something that Alan would say about like a natural system or a tribal system or that kind of an arrangement, that kind of hierarchy, if you will, where the leader appears naturally. He's a
right?
natural leader, and there's no question about it. And there's nothing about that leader that has to command because people want to do what is suggested. They want to
Right.
do. And that's it. There are very few commands, later on there are one or two that we understand are for people's safety or,
Mm.
that kind of thing that the director makes. But for the most part, it's him working with their own minds. And that's what I see that he's doing with Jane because he's bringing her into the understanding that Mark is in trouble, that Mark is working for the other side, that she needs to do something about that, that it's up to her now to bring Mark out of that nice and bring him back into a different world if he's to be saved and if anything is to be saved. And she is rejecting that because she's still very much in her John Donne dissertation where she's, thinking about marriage and what is marriage and is it physical? Is it a blend of something else? So
It says she kept turning red like a schoolgirl, just to underline that
yeah.
childish response that she's having. But yeah, he does ask, we had hoped you would become one of our army.
Hmm.
And earlier that's Miss Hardcastle says to, the fairy Hardcastle says to Mark that we are an army in reference to the Nice in the early conversations he has with her. So that you've got these two armies, these two opposing armies.
So then they have an interesting discussion about what is marriage.
Yeah,
And she says she doesn't want to. This is an interesting one. She doesn't really want to go home, but she doesn't want to commit to this. And she said, "Don't send me back. I'm all alone at home with terrible dreams." It isn't as if Mark and I saw much of one another at the best of times. I'm so unhappy. He won't care whether I come here or not. He'd only laugh at all if he knew. Is it fair that my whole life should be spoiled? Now she's getting into childishness, right? Is it fair that my whole life should be spoiled just because he's got mixed up with some horrible people? You don't think a woman is to have no life of her own just because she's married. So the director is kind of disabusing her of that. He says, "Are you unhappy now?" And she looks at him and says, "No, but it will be worse if I go back." "Will it?" He says, I don't know. I suppose not." And for a little time, Jane was hardly conscious of anything but peace and well-being. This is an interesting thing there. It's going to come up in a few minutes, but she's unconscious of nothing but peace and well-being. So part of what the director is doing is showing her a kind of a here and now
yeah,
to all
presence.
relationships and presence, and we'll get back on that. But she has a lot of you mentioned a minute ago a lot of modern ideas about marriage, and you said, "Is this feminism?" And I said yes. And I had kind of hoped that I would have a moment or two to look up the history of some of the writers who were writing it. The French woman I don't remember her last name, but Simone was the first. It was either Beauvoir or something
Mhm.
like that. But anyway, famous French feminist, and to see when these ideas, but obviously these ideas were circulating in 1945 because C.S. Lewis is writing about it.
Yeah,
Because he is, she is saying, "Oh, well, it's not good." And And it's not his fault. I think our marriage was just a mistake. It's just very childish. She's been married 6 months, and it's just this very childish thing about marriage. And he's kind of slowly bringing her, and telling her things. He said, well, they would say, she wonders what his masters, right? Who does the
Mhm.
director answer to? What would they say about marriage and about her marriage? And he said, they would say that you do not fail in obedience through lack of love, but have lost love because you never attempted obedience. There is something, I'm not going to stress on this too much, but I will say that there is something in her conversation with the director about equality that is so profound to the nature of a good and happy marriage that if you are married or in a relationship, you ought to go read those pages for yourself and think about it. They get into a conversation about equality, and I actually thought, before I drifted off to sleep last night, I was thinking a lot about the word equality. And in fact, I didn't do it, but I wanted to. And let me just see if I can make my screen smaller. I can't seem to escape. Look up the word equal for me
Mhm.
because I can't get out of my massive screen here and see a browser.
Etymology
But
or just a
just,
definition,
yeah,
dictionary
etymology or
definition?
definition. Yeah. Yeah. Look up a definition first.
Okay.
What is equal?
So I'm going to dictionary.com and it's an adjective as great as, the same as. That's the first definition. Or like or alike in quantity, degree, or value. Or number three is evenly proportioned or balanced. Number four is uniform in operation or effect. Five
Okay.
is adequate or sufficient in quantity or degree.
Well, the thing that in my pre-sleep mode last night, the thing I was thinking about was the word equal. And I'm like, look it up because Orwell's 1984 was coming to mind when the whole thing with this is that they want to mess with your mind so much that you no longer believe that 2 plus 2 equals 4. So I was just lying there pondering the equation portion of the meaning. It equals, so that you touched on that in one of the definitions. Two apples and two oranges together equal 4 pieces of fruit. So they're not identical, but it is it's a measurement. It's an equal. But the thing that he launches into is explaining to her about equality. And she said, I thought love meant equality and free companionship. And the director said, ah, equality. We must talk of that some other time. Yes, we must all be guarded by equal rights from one another's greed because we are fallen. Just as we must all wear clothes for the same reason, but the naked body should be there underneath the clothes, ripening for the day when we shall need them no longer. Equality is not the deepest thing. Jane says, I always thought that was just what it was. I thought it was in their souls that people were equal. You were mistaken, he said gravely. That is the last place where they are equal. Equality before the law, equality of incomes, that is very well. Equality guards life, it doesn't make it. It is medicine, not food. You might as well try to warm yourself with a blue book. But surely in marriage, worse and worse, said the director. Courtship knows nothing of it, nor does fruition. What has free companionship to do with it? So there is a little bit more of that, but it is important because this whole idea of equality, this is getting to the heart of feminism. Now, he doesn't deny it. He says equality before the law. Okay, don't have a problem with that. Equal rights, equal, equality of incomes, all very well. You can't have that in a marriage. This is what he's trying to explain to
Hmm.
her. And I will just say that my own experience has taught me that it's not something to strive for. It's rather absurd. If you want to look at the qualities of a woman, and that's what C.S. Lewis is doing in these novels with the male, the female gender, and and the blending of the two and the harmony of the two, it, it's actually not possible. If a woman is truly a woman and a man is truly a man, there is no equality there.
No, two different functions, different designs, different aptitudes, yeah, there's so many differences, and it's about finding that complement to each other, not matching each other in every way, in every ability and every action. It's about kind of what do you bring? What does your partner bring? And where do you shine? Where your partner might not be so good, and finding that bringing those two, it's kind of like the yin and yang almost. Like there's a connection, but you're not the same. It's not a mirror image, is it?
Mm-mm.
You're two very different beings.
And
Um,
there's something else too about a true marriage and a good marriage, but a true marriage, especially if we think about the created order or the natural order, is that two plus two does not equal four. In an ideal marriage, one plus one equals one. Uh, so how do you make one from two?
mm.
Getting mystical.
But the director does give a little sort of a conclusion, a little hint later, doesn't he, with his little stunt with the mice. And he eats some food. They bring in some wine and bread, which people I'm sure will be familiar with the significance of that, the sort of uh, nod to Christianity there. And then when he's done with his bread, he throws the crumbs on the floor, and then he uh, plays a little whistle, and then tells Jane to sit very still. And then some little mice come in from a little hole in the wall and come to pick up the crumbs, and it's a great little scene. Uh, it's described like this: thanks to this effort, she saw mice for the first time as they really are, not as creeping things, but as dainty quadrupeds. Almost when they sat up like tiny kangaroos, with sensitive, kid gloved forepaws and transparent ears. With quick, inaudible movements, they ranged to and fro till not a crumb was left on the floor. Then he blew a second time on his whistle, and with a whisk of the tails, all three of them were racing for home. The director looked at her with laughter in his eyes. There, he said, a very simple adjustment. Humans want crumbs removed. Mice are anxious to remove them. It ought never to have been a cause of war. But you see that obedience and rule are more like a dance than a drill, especially between man and woman, where the roles are always changing. And so he
Mhm.
gives her a little demonstration, a little insight into what it
Mhm.
more should be like. So I thought that was a really good little scene as well.
That is good. He also touches with her again because obedience and humility are going to come up not just in terms of mice and crumbs and marriage, but in many ways, those concepts which C.S. Lewis has intertwined obedience and humility, making it, and kind of an just like that, an intertwined thing. And he said, he's explaining to her about, the happy marriage. He said, no one has ever told you that obedience, humility is an erotic necessity. You are putting equality just where it ought not to be. And that's that's a good one.
And this has quite an effect on her as well. Because
Yeah.
after she leaves, there's a great section about how there's four Janes
Yeah,
inside
yeah,
her, all having
yes.
these different experiences, and she's so muddled up. And there's one resisting it, and one that's receptive, and one that's feeling all this joy. And so she kind of leaves there very spellbound. But there's a great bit here about what happened. She talks about well, the C.S. Lewis says that she's reflecting on beauty, and she comes to this realization that she's looking well, and but it was not about vanity. He says, for beauty was made for others. Her beauty belonged to the director. It belonged to him so completely that he could even decide not to keep it for himself, but to order that it be given to another by an act of obedience lower and therefore higher, more unconditional and therefore more delighting than if he had demanded it for himself. So it's kind of, it's worked on her. The decision's been made, I feel like, but she's just almost integrating this new reality.
What she's learning, I think, is that love and obedience are actually also intertwined.
Mhm.
You know, the humility that is required, that's almost synonymous with obedience. And in order to love, you know, we're not just talking about the love in a marriage, but we're talking about real love. That's not just a greeting card sentiment has that involved in there. You know, it's not what you want, it's what
Yeah,
a, yeah.
it's kind of what, and this is part of um, a theme that goes through the book as well, is this sort of submission or recognition or awareness of something higher and beyond and more important than you and yourself and your life and your career and your academic aspirations. Because both Mark and Jane are kind of embroiled in these bigger plans that are driven by forces that are way bigger than them. And there's a little episode there while she's in the room just before she leaves where she starts to feel incredibly small, and even the director feels small. And I think the idea is that these El Dealer are about to visit and descend in the
Hmm.
room to visit him, and so she has this sensation suddenly that even the director's a mouse, and she's a mouse, and even so there's something even bigger and more powerful and stronger and more divine, let's say,
Hmm.
out there. So this is part of it as well, is that you can only humble yourself and fall into alignment with that, or you can fight it, but
Hmm.
you're not going to be able to. Like,
Hmm.
good luck if you want to fight it. So, um, yeah. So she leaves the house, got to go back to Edgetoe, and then she has a harrowing experience because she meets Miss Hardcastle, the fairy, and something I said to you after we recorded last time was about fairy, and I was wondering if this character, the fairy, is actually a man, because of all the descriptions up to this point and a couple coming up in this part describe her basically as a man, like this hulking body, sitting legs akimbo, the just the mannerisms, the way Miss Hardcastle interacts with her underlings, and again in this section here. So Jane gets back to Edgetoe and she realizes that this riot is underway. So this riot that's been planned by the Nice, it's kicking off, and she's trying to avoid it. She's going the long route home, but every route she tries to take home is blocked by chaos. And so she goes an even longer route home and she gets waylaid, and she goes past the asylum, and she goes past a place called Bone Lane, and she's seeing people looting and making bonfires. And then eventually she gets surrounded by the Nice police, and she meets Miss Hardcastle. And this is how it's described. Miss Hardcastle looked her in the face for the first time, and Jane felt quite a new sensation. She was already tired and frightened, but this was different. The face of the other woman affected her as the face of some men. Fat men with small, greedy eyes and strange, disquieting smiles had affected her when she was in her teens. So again, she's taken back to childhood. And this woman, Miss Hardcastle, gives her this feeling of being leered at by fat men with small, greedy eyes. And Miss Hardcastle arrests her, makes and presents her some piece of paper that's full of boxes and documents and small print and signatures. Freaks her out with the bureaucracy of a form, and basically kidnaps her with the plan of taking her back to Belbury. And on the way, she kind of realizes that she must be coming back from the director, from the location where the director and his army are situated, and so she tries to get that information out of her. And I think she gets her underlings to tie Jane to a chair, and then Miss Hardcastle is sitting with her legs wide apart and settling herself in the chair, as in the saddle, sitting opposite her. And then she lights her cheroot, her little cigar, and then she starts to burn Jane in the shoulder to ask her about where she's been to find this out. Um, and Jane does not give her the information. The riot catches up with them. The Miss Hardcastle and her little underlings run away, and Jane is picked up. Is it by the Conistons? It's somebody who knows her. Oh no, it's just some strangers in the car. Some friendly people pick her up, give her some chocolate and some brandy and some sandwiches. Those platonic versions of those things that make her feel better. And she says, "Take me to St. Anne's. Take me back, to the director and his house and his group at the manor." And so she ends up going back there. And that's the end of chapter 7.
Okay, chapter 8 is called Moonlight at Belbury, and
Ooh,
Belbury
I don't
is where
have,
the
sorry,
nice is.
I don't have chapter names in my copy.
Oh, yeah,
Interesting. I can't believe you
yeah,
just realized that.
yeah. It's I've got chapter names. So this is Moonlight at Belbury, and Belbury is where the nice are headquartered.
It's a blood transfusion office, isn't it?
Yes. And if you think about that, it sounds nice, right? Moonlight at Belbury,
Yeah.
but it's Bury the Bell, you know.
Yeah, Barry, of course.
Yeah. So let's see. We dive in, I think, here where Fairy Hardcastle is telling Wither, that's the deputy director, that she had picked up Jane. And he said, well, that was hardly a suitable occasion. And, the fairy is one we notice with her that she doesn't take commands from anybody. And this is an interesting thing, whether it's a man or a woman. So whether we've got a man in women's clothing or we've got a woman, what we have is someone, let's just say it's a woman, who is so far away from anything we identify with feminine or womanly that she's not recognizable as a woman. And this thing that the director was describing to Jane about obedience and humility intertwined with love.
Mm,
And
none of
this,
that.
see, Fairy Hardcastle, she obeys nobody. She takes direction from nobody. So there she is working for the deputy director, who's kind of Wither scary. He's a scary fellow, but this doesn't intimidate the Fairy Hardcastle because she's completely unhinged from a hierarchy. She's a law unto herself.
Yeah.
And what I found so fascinating there is when she is describing that she picked up the girl and he's saying, no, this isn't the way to do it. Now she's never going to come around. We can get what we want from her. We can pull it out. We can you've got to have some finesse with this. You can't just torture her. And he says, saying, oh, this is the way I do it. And he said, well, I should not be doing my duty if I failed to remind you that complaints from that quarter have already been made, though not, of course, minuted, meaning off the books, as to your tendency to allow a certain emotional excitement in the disciplinary or remedial side of your work. So the director has just called her a sadist without
And
without using that word. Yeah.
his preference, uh, because he says I always deplore anything that is not perfectly humane. But that is quite consistent with the position that if more drastic expedients have to be used, then they must be used thoroughly. So he says like you if you're gonna do it, you go all the way and get it
Yeah.
done, you know. Moderate pain, such as any ordinary degree of endurance can resist, is always a mistake. It's no true kindness to the prisoner. The more scientific, and may I add, more civilized facilities for coercive examination, which we have placed at your disposal here, might have been successful. So these characters are just insane.
Yeah.
But the Wither is such an interesting character as well. I mean, I think it'll come in a little bit later how seems to float around everywhere, in and out all these different rooms. And Mark has a few strange experiences with Wither
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
that'll be worth diving into. I'd like to know what you think about that because I couldn't quite work out what was behind it or going on there. But um,
Oh, I think I have my own take on it for sure.
oh, good. I want to hear that. And so they have a bit of a telling off. And then Miss Hardcastle is instructed that the head wants to see her. And I think this might be the first time we hear about the head. It's kind
Yes.
of the head, capitalized T, capital H. And so we assume this is above the director. This is the boss, the big boss, the headmaster, the head of the organization, the head of the
Hmm.
nice. And then the scene ends. She just gets told she's going in. Before she goes in, she throws up out of nerves. But then she says, "No, I'm fine. It's okay. It'll take more than this to upset me."
Hmm.
And Philostrato, Miss Hardcastle, and I think that with her as well, they all go in to see the head, and then it cuts to Jane, and she wakes up in the manor house with the director and the company, and also Mr. Bultitude, which is a great name, Mr. Bultitude, who is a tame is it a brown bear
Yes, yes.
that lives with the director
Yeah.
and the family and hilarious character. He's in the bathroom where it's nice and warm and he's kind of like a moody teenager, like you know, getting annoyed with people, moving him on and moving him out into when he's in the way. And there's a hilarious bit as well where Jane's walking through the house and she looks through a room and she sees Mr. Bultitude meditatively boxing a punch bowl. You know, so doing the on it's just a hilarious scene. But basically, that's telling us that it harkens back to the first book and also the biblical idea that man is above the beasts
Hmm.
and that man can live in harmony with the beasts and has this responsibility, in fact, to be a sort of caretaker and a carer for the beasts and this is part of that natural hierarchy that we were talking about and this is why the director just has this effect on animals where they're tame around him and he can communicate with them and he can tame the mice to come and clean the crumbs away and he lets the bear and there's a jackdaw as well, a
Hmm.
bird living in there with them. So that's just a bit of comedy. I don't know the sort of significance of there being a tame
And
bear living in the house, but it adds to that wholesomeness of that I was describing earlier of the
yeah.
sandwiches and the fire and the pots of tea and the very English humor that they have with each
Well, it
other.
is kind of heavenly if you think about it. There is something kind of, heavenly there that the beasts that we would normally want to stay clear of, you can cohabitate with.
Yes, it is. It's almost the well, it's like the paradise on Venus, where
Uh-huh.
the animals, there's Ransom meets a little dragon, doesn't he? That
Hmm.
follows him around and is friendly to him, and the fish kind of help him out, and they
Right.
let him ride them and follow him. So all the animals are they're not aggressive. They're not looking to hunt, and they're not fearful of humans as we are here on this fallen world, where a lot of animals will avoid the humans. They've learned that we're going to kill them and eat them, and then the bigger ones will be predators to us. So,
And that's one of the things too that I was struck by on Paralandra with the Green Lady was that she understood that part of her work, if she didn't have a concept for work, but part of what she was doing was taming the animals, making them more gentle, so it wasn't necessarily even on Perlandra that they had been created to get along so well with humans, or well, they weren't human on Paralandra, but they weren't, and within the higher order there, they weren't created that way to
mhm,
be domesticated, but it was something that she was actually charged with doing by, from Malildil.
mhm.
One of the things that you do is you soften the animals.
Yeah, I've forgotten about that actually. So what we get here is yeah, this kind of paradise almost, little bubble of paradise, and we get an insight into how the house works, and we meet MacPhee, who is a Scottish skeptic, and he has a great bit on opinions. He says, "Mrs. Studdock, I have no opinions on any subject in the world. I state the facts and exhibit the implications. If everyone indulged in fewer opinions," he pronounced the word with emphatic disgust, "there'd be less silly talking and printing in the world." So McPhee is the resident skeptic. He's a very important part of the army, the director says later on. And there's the Dimbles and the Conistons and Mrs. Dimble, Mother Dimble, as she's known here, um, tells Jane, "There are no servants here. We all do the work. The women do it one day and the men the next. It's a very sensible arrangement. The director's idea is that men and women can't do housework together without quarreling." And Jane says, "But why should they quarrel? Different methods, my dear. Men can't help in a job, you know? They can be induced to do it, but not to help while you're doing it." And then McPhee comes in with a great one. "The cardinal difficulty," said McPhee, and you excuse me, I'm not going to attempt a Scottish accent, "in collaboration between the sexes is that women speak a language without nouns. If two men are doing a bit of work, one will say to the other, 'Put this bowl inside the bigger bowl where you'll find on the top shelf of the green cupboard.' The female for this is, 'Put that in the other one in there.' And then if you ask them in where, they say, 'In there, of course.' There is consequently a phatic hiatus." So, yeah, it's so wholesome. And these people, they're so close, but they do give each other a little bit of that nagging sort of teasing. But you can just tell that it's not like the nice where everyone's undercutting each other and backbiting, and it's competitive and it's cutthroat and it's ruthless. And Mark finds that out in the first visit. People are like, "Don't listen to them guys over there, they're idiots, and come and listen to this
Mhm.
person over here." And it's the total opposite of that. This is homely, it's comfortable, it's warm, it's kind, it's compassionate, it's love, it's all the good stuff. It's
Mhm.
a great just comparison and contrast. Did you want to add anything about this section? Any notes you had?
No,
I
I
kind
think
of summarized about.
you hit all of the things that I wrote down on there. So
Oh, good.
you got them all.
What's next? Because I think it goes back to Mark, and then
Yeah, no, with
does it
that,
go back
yeah,
to
this
Mark? Yeah.
section with Mark is quite interesting.
Yeah, there was
Um,
so much here.
yeah.
There was a lot here. So this is where we find out that um Feverstone, Divine, is even a puppet. He's a pawn. He's
Hmm.
not all powerful. He's not. We hadn't known this up until this point, but I wrote here, "Useful idiots." Fairy Hardcastle says to Mark that old Dick was a mere politician at heart, and he always would be. And once the nice rose to its height, he could be sacrificed. And so he's been put in as the emergency governor of Edgestow to manage it during all of these riots and everything. And they're going to throw him to the wolves once he's served his purpose, in the same way that Feverson said they would with Curry earlier in the book. Not that that he'd get thrown to the wolves, but it was like he's the right man for that job. We put him in there. We let him do his job. He's never going to know anything more or ascend any higher in the organization. So they have a similar thing about Feverstone. So then Mark finds himself in with Frost, Fairy, and Wither, and they are happy that the riot went off well. And it also says Mark enjoyed reading his own accounts of it in the morning papers. So that's his ego again coming in. He's very proud of himself and the work that he's doing and feeling all big and important. And then they start telling him that he has to bring Jane to stay with them at Belbury. Um, and this freaks Mark out, and he kind of he doesn't really address it. He just sort of makes excuses. This is the director, the deputy director, brings this up to him, and he just sort of excuses himself and leaves because he doesn't really know about it. And then he has this whole reflection on what it would mean if Jane was there with him and how horrible that would be because she wouldn't understand anything and he'd have to explain things to her and she wouldn't get it and she really wouldn't fit in and it's interesting that he has this intuition or at least this sense that she being there would highlight the stupidity of it all, the shallow hollowness of it all,
Hmm.
right? Which is it shows that he's not totally lost,
Did
right?
you
It
did
shows.
you underline that thing there? Did you underline that sentence that started her mere presence? That's a good
Yeah, I
one.
was just looking for
Yeah.
that while I
Okay.
was. Where is it?
Uh,
Is it around that part I was just
it's yes,
describing?
it is. Yeah.
Let me see. Her mere presence would have made all the laughter of the inner ring sound metallic, unreal, and what he now regarded as common prudence would seem to her, and through her to himself, mere flattery, backbiting, and toad eating. So he knows.
Yeah.
He knows
Yeah.
that's what it is,
Yeah.
right? But he
Yeah.
just his ego and the this prestige and being liked. Jane in the middle of Belbury would turn the whole of Belbury into a vast vulgarity, flashy and yet furtive. His mind sickened at the thought of trying to teach Jane that she must help to keep Wither in a good temper and must play up to Fairy Hardcastle. Yeah, and then he makes a hasty exit away from the director. But yeah, he knows he's got this
Hmm.
conscience deep down. He knows
Hmm.
where he should be and what he should be doing, and that he's doing the wrong thing, but he just ignores it. It's not. It's a really weak voice in it, isn't it? His conscience. It's there, but it's so weak.
Well,
Let's
now
see.
we're at dinner. Now we're at dinner where Mark has just basically blown off the deputy director. "Ah, I don't want to bring Jane here. And he's going to go to dinner and sit with Philostrato and
Yes,
Gould. And Gould, if you think it
Gould.
now, Philostrato, I didn't look up Philostrato or break it down or try to, figure that one out. But Gould is another hard metallic name. Gould, gold, steel,
And Ghoul.
frost. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah, just
ooh,
like
I didn't think of that. Good.
and Philostrato. The only thing I came up for, and I did do a brief look, and there's some old poem called Il Philostrato or something like that, which didn't seem to connect. But what I put next to Philostrato was castrato
Ooh.
because of some of the things that he says in this exchange, right?
Oh, that's so good. That's so good. Yeah.
And so I thought maybe that might be a link, but he sits down next to Philostrato and Mark and Gould and Mr. Winter, and they're having this conversation. Philostrato's talking about trees, and he's saying the forest tree is a weed. But I tell you, I have seen the civilized tree in Persia. It was a French attaché who had it because he was in a place where trees do not grow. It was made of metal, a poor, crude thing. But how if it were perfected? Light made of aluminium, so natural it would even deceive. So he's on about replacing real trees with lampposts,
Hmm.
basically.
Hmm.
He says, consider the advantages. You get tired of him in one place, the tree. Two workmen carry him somewhere else, wherever you please. It never dies. No leaves to fall, no twigs, no birds building nests, no muck and mess.
What have they done with 5G towers? Made them look
Oh,
like trees in a lot of
yeah,
places.
that's it. They have. They've like, I've seen like hilarious memes of these fake trees standing next to real ones and the little speech bubble that says, so guys, how about that photosynthesis? You know? Because these disguises are ridiculous. And cacti as well, cacti
Yes.
5G. Yeah, it's crazy. We got some Philostratos clearly in the telecommunications business. Um, but what he talks about in his sort of his goal and what he and remember Philostrato is one of the attendants to the head. He kind
Mhm.
of manages people's access there
Mhm.
to the head going in and out. So he talks about at present, we must have forests for the atmosphere. Presently, we find a chemical substitute, and then why any natural trees? I foresee nothing but the art tree all over the earth. In fact, we clean the planet. And this is what I was alluding to earlier, where he talks about Mark replies, so Phil Strato goes on, I would not have any birds either. On the art tree,
Mhm.
I would have the art birds all singing. And art, I think, is to me artificial, right?
Mhm.
Artificial birds all singing when you press a switch. When you're tired of the singing, you switch them off. Consider the improvements. No feathers, no nests, no eggs, no dirt. Mark says, it sounds like abolishing pretty well all organic life. And why not? It is simple hygiene. Listen, my friends, if you pick up some rotten thing and find this organic life crawling all over it, do you not say, "Oh, the horrid thing, it's alive," and then drop it? And this goes on like this. But then he talks, and then a little further down, he says, "That is the point." Gould says, "What are you driving at?" He says, "That is the point. In us, organic life has produced mind. It's done its work. After that, we want no more of it. We do not want the world any longer furred over with organic life, like what you call the blue mold, all sprouting and budding and breeding
Mhm.
and decaying. We must get rid of it. By little and little, of course. Slowly we learn how. Learn to make our brains live with less and less body. Learn to build our bodies directly with chemicals. No longer have to stuff them full of dead brutes and weeds. Learn how to reproduce ourselves without copulation. So that's your Brave New World test tube babies.
Mhm.
And there's a little bit down here where he even echoes Charles Galton Darwin. He says, uh, "Who would?" He says, "There will never be peace and order and
Mhm.
discipline so long as there is sex. When man
Mhm.
has thrown it away, then he will become finally governable." And that is
Okay.
in.
Go ahead. Go
Well,
ahead.
just to mention, it's in Charles Galton Darwin. He talks about, and I got it ready. And actually, I already this was already in here at the
Oh,
page.
okay, good. Hang on a second. I'll be right back for that quote.
Page 124, the next million years, Charles Gordon Darwin's talking about why cannot man set up a community like an ant's nest hive, right? Um, thus, the control of the numbers of the two sexes may become possible. And with the knowledge of the various sexual hormones, it might also become possible to free the majority of mankind from the urgency of sexual impulse so that they could live contented, celibate lives instead of the unsatisfied celibate lives that are the compulsory lot of such a large fraction of the present population of the world. So these technocratic scientism worshipping maniacs think along the same lines.
They do,
And
and oh, go ahead. Get you
just
know.
I was going to say, when you look at what's happened to the plummeting birth rates to places like Japan and Korea, where you have this phenomenon of young adults just staying locked in at home playing computer games, not bothering to go out and start families. It's happening. They're doing it, you know, and I know, ex I just see it around me
Mhm.
and in society, and you hear these kinds of stories. So they're bringing that about. They're messing with people's hormones so that the sexual impulse is not there anymore. People are confused. They don't know what they are. They just go off their subjective feelings. They've really done a number with regard to this. So it's quite amazing to hear it written about in these, well, Next Million Years was in the 50s. This was the 40s.
It
And
is
that's why I
amazing.
put castrato, because on the next page he talks about he just says they're talking about Mark's wife. And he says, "As for your wife," resumed Philostrato, "I attach no importance to it. What have I to do with men's wives? The whole subject disgusts me." That's where I put it. I put castrato.
Yeah, that's very funny. There's a little bit further down there where he's talking about that they bring up Jules, which we've already established we think is H.G. Wells.
Yeah, I think
And
so.
so Philostrato says, Jules, why do you speak of him? I say it was all true. The world I look forward to is the world of perfect purity, the clean mind and the clean minerals. What are the things that most offend the dignity of man? Birth and breeding and death. How if we are about to discover that man can live without any of the three? So that this is what I think C.S. Lewis, it continues on into the next page about a pure race, the great race. Um, and I wrote in the margin here Hitler, but it's more than that because Hitler takes a bad rap for eugenical, dysgenical practices that were being promoted within the US and the UK for decades before he got hold of them. So this is just part of it. It's also here too that they talk more about the ability to um, keep the head detached from the body. And, so you've got that. We know that at the time that C.S. Lewis was writing this, he would be aware of those kind of experiments. So he cites Hitler at some point here by name. I'm not sure what page that is, but he's understanding this not from just the racial hygiene purity of Hitler, but he's understanding it from where scientism and scientocracy take you. And he wrote about it. If you look at private letters, I mean, I've been looking into him more and more and reading about what he said to so and so in a letter and private correspondences and that kind of thing. He used the word scientocracy in his private communications,
Ah,
and he uses scientism all of, quite frequently. So
mhm.
he understood that these ideas are leading you towards a specific end.
Yeah,
And that's why he's writing against H.G. Wells, who was a friend
yeah.
of his, but he's like, no, this doesn't end well for man. But Philostrato plays the role of saying, well, that's okay because we don't like man anyway.
Yeah, we're done with man. We've
Yeah.
got mind. That's the whole purpose of organic life, is to create mind, and now mind is here. We go on to the next phase. It's transhumanism.
Hmm.
And the reason they're talking about Jules is because Philostrato says he says something like, "Oh, the boss wants to speak to you," and he's like, "Oh, Jules, Jules is here," and he's like, "Why do you keep talking about Jules? I'm talking about the head."
Yeah.
And Mark's kind of like, a bit unsure about this and what's going on. And Philostrato kind of explains. He says, "The head thinks that you cannot be really one of us if you will not bring your wife here. He will have all of you, and all that is yours or nothing. You must bring the woman in too. She also must be one of us." So it's again, it's that inverse of the director of the good side saying to Jane, "Bring, get him out of there, bring him over here," and the Dimbles and also the What's the other one? Coniston? I keep blanking on it.
Deniston.
Deniston saying you're either in or you're out. It's like there's no
Hmm.
fence sitting here.
Hmm.
It's you're on one of these two sides, and if you don't make a decision consciously, it'll be made for you.
Hmm.
Um, and then there's a really interesting bit about the moon, right? Because they're looking at the moon, it's nighttime, and Philostrato says, "Now there's a world for you. There's a cleanness, purity, thousands of square miles of polished rock with not one blade of grass, not one fiber of lichen, not one grain of dust." And then Mark says, "Yes, a dead world," gazing at the moon. "No," says Philostrato, "there is life there." "Do we know that?" asked Mark. "Oh, see, intelligent
Hmm.
life under the surface, a great race, further advanced than we, an inspiration, a pure race. They have cleaned their world, broken free almost from the organic. But how? They do not need to be born and breed and die. Only their common people, their canaglia, do that. The masters live on. They retain their intelligence. They keep it artificially alive after the organic body has been dispensed with. A miracle of applied biochemistry. They do not need organic food. They are almost free of nature, attached to her only by the thinnest, finest cord. So it sounds to me, and I've only just occurred to me, but he's talking about the evil El dealer, isn't he?
Hmm.
He's talking about the bent El dealer. That's
Hmm.
yeah, okay. Because at first I was like, life on it. But what's interesting is that apparently there is life on the surface, on the dark side of the moon, the side we can't see. And Philostrato explains what's happening to that. He says they are slowly spreading their hygiene over the whole
Hmm.
globe, disinfecting her. The savages fight against them. There are frontiers and fierce wars, but the great race presses on. And yeah, that was quite a basically telling us the plan of what they want to do here, right? They've obviously made contact with these entities or demons or evil angels or fallen angels or El Dealer. I think they're still just called El Dealer, aren't they? We don't have another word for them, do we, from C.S. Lewis?
I
The
don't
evil
think
El
so.
Dealer.
Yeah, I don't think so.
And they've seen that these beings don't have a physical body and they're trying to become like them, aren't they? They're trying to free their consciousness from the biological entity, the biological human.
Yeah, I mean, this is something I don't want to get ahead, and I've made notes further down, so we don't have to spend too much time on it. But there is something here that C.S. Lewis is showing us in this novel, which is important, which
Hmm.
is that scientocracy is not scientific materialism. And there may be more explicit conversations about that down the road, but this is intelligence gathering and what that means. So they go back to forces and spirits, and this is the whole point of what is at Bragton Wood. It's they're looking for power in its purest, rawest form. And that power is not just mastering science through what we call scientific, empirical methodology. It's something darker and more sinister than that we're being shown.
Okay. Yeah. So I think we could probably finish this chapter and then we'll have to wrap it up because I'm getting close to my
Oh,
curfew.
okay.
So what happens? Mark is told he has to go and visit the head, and he's asked if he's ready. And then Strake is there and says, "Do you mean really to join us, young man? There is no turning back once you have set your hand to the plow." And then they tell him that the head is one who has survived death. And Strike is likening him to Jesus. This is the real man at last, and it claims all our allegiance. Mark says, "What the devil are you talking about?"
Mhm.
Appropriate question. Devil indeed. "My friend is quite right," said Philostrato. "Our head is the first of the new men, the first that lives beyond animal life. As far as nature is concerned, he's already dead. If nature had her way with His brain would now be mouldering in the grave, but he will speak to you within the hour, and a word in your ear, my friend, you will obey his orders.
Hmm.
But who is it? Said Mark. It's Francois Alcassan, said Philostrato. You mean the man who was guillotined? Said Mark. And so this is when we discover that the head of the knight is the man who was sent to his death in Jane's dream at the very beginning of the book. Um, and then Philostrato reveals a bit more of the plan about how power is going to be confined to a small number of individual men, those who are selected for eternal life. So this is the power you were talking about that they're trying to harness, that they're trying to uh, uncover and access.
And Strake says right there right at that point, he said, "It is the beginning of man immortal and man ubiquitous, man on the throne of the universe." It is what all the prophecies really meant.
Mhm. Yeah. And then this bit confused me a little bit. Mark says, and you mean the power will be extended to all men? No, said Philostrato. I mean, it will then be reduced to one man. You are not a fool, are you, my young friend? All that talk about the power of man over nature, man in the abstract, is only for the canaglia. You know as well as I do that man's power over nature means the power of some men over other men with nature as the instrument. There is no such thing as man. It is a word. There are only men. No, it is not man who will be omnipotent. It is some one man, some immortal man. Alcazan, our head, is the first sketch. The completed product may be someone else. It may be you, it may be me. So is he saying that it's going to be a hive mind rather than a collection of individuals? Is that what he's getting at there? Some one man, some immortal man? And that threw me a little bit when I read that, reread it.
Well, if you carry on to the next page, it I I don't know that, because what they're creating there with the hive, I still think there's something above that, kind of the
Mm,
Charles Galton Darwin wild man idea, because he's saying here, let's see. Okay, so they've got he's explaining they've got power over everything. Is it for everybody? No. And he says, we found out how to make a dead man live. He lives forever now, and then he gets wiser. Later, we make him live better. For present, we must make life not very agreeable to him that has it. But later, we make it pleasant for some,
mm.
perhaps not so pleasant for others, for we can make the dead live, whether they wish it or not. And this is interesting because there is, actually in the Christian Bible, it says that there will come a time
Yeah,
where
it
people
does.
will want to die and they
Wish to
cannot
Die.
die.
And
Yes.
this reminds me of the series Black Mirror, because there's a few episodes in there where people's consciousness is downloaded into a computer of some description.
Well,
But then once it's in there, they can keep it alive forever. They can torture it. They can make time, make 1 second feel like 1,000 years to that
yes.
consciousness, and that's explored quite extensively in that series.
Yeah, well, just on the previous page where you were going through there about the new man, I had written in the margin engram, which is something that Alan Watt had talked about, the downloading of the essence of the man into a computer, so
Mm.
that is an engram.
Oh, I hadn't heard that term before.
Yeah. And that was another thing I wanted to do a little more looking into last night, but I ran out of time. But then he goes on, see, I don't really know how these people like Strake and Philostrato and Withers think how they're going to play, except if I think of them as like what you said, the Hive doesn't quite do it for me, but Legion does. So a perfectly coordinated as one army body of fully possessed evil that move
Mm.
as one. And the interesting thing, about evil is it too has a hierarchy, but it still moves as one organism. And Strake said, don't Philostratus says, my friend, oh God, where do I go back up to it? Okay, so Mark says, God, because Strake says God will have power to give eternal reward. God? How did he come into it? I don't believe in God, says Mark. But, my friend, said Philostrato, does it follow that because there was no God in the past, that there will be no God in the future? And Strake said, don't you see that we are offering you the unspeakable glory of being present at the creation of God Almighty? Here in this house, you shall meet the first sketch of the real God. It is a man, or a being made by man, who will finally ascend the throne of the universe and rule forever. So, what what they're telling us there is that the head that Mark is about to meet is not God. He's like a first sketch of God, but they
Yeah.
are making God.
He's like a prototype or a version, an early version.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And that's basically where the chapter ends with Mark being taken to a room, and it has a wall full of tubes and dials, and it seems to be this almost this living creature. And then it just ends with him being taken through a door in the wall full of tubes and dials. And that's
yeah.
where I'm going to have to
Okay.
wrap up the call because I've got about 5 more minutes till my Wi-Fi shuts off.
Okay.
I'm
Well,
glad I'm
listen.
glad I put that thing in. I put this little timer on the plug that cuts it, the power to the router at a certain time every night. But then I always wish I hadn't done that when I'm on these calls, and there's a lot
Well,
more to
that's
talk
okay. I
about.
mean, we really did try, we did our best to get through a chunk of this. We aimed for 5 chapters and we actually got 3.
Yeah,
So,
not bad.
but we have to, it takes what it takes. So next time we record, we will aim for, I don't know, at least trying to get to 14, maybe
Yeah.
14 or 15. We'll see what we can do.
But
And
there's so
I've,
much in there, and there are
oh
so many
yeah.
different avenues to talk about, and it's not a big book, and it's not a complicated or a difficult read at all. It's so easy to read, and he's just packed so much in there. So it's
It's
great to
just,
unpack it
yeah. And
slowly and
I think
take our
so.
time.
I'd rather us take our time and we've studied, we've got our ideas about what connects to what. So I don't know when we will record those next 5 chapters, but it will be upcoming soon. We don't want to lose our momentum. And I'll let you go before the Wi-Fi kicks out. I think that I am going to be talking to you next week with a woman named Christina. I'm looking forward to that. So I've had a couple of nice conversations with her, and I think you'll enjoy that conversation. So with that, we say hasta la vista, baby.
I'll be back.
Yes. All right. I really enjoyed this. Don't forget to check out Nick Hayes and Hayes Reviews and his live stream on Friday and the book club over on School, which is a membership book. It's these videos aren't public and it's very interesting and engaging and it's important stuff and fun. All right.